What if I told you that some of Hollywood's most iconic stars were relentlessly torn apart by critics who dismissed them as wooden, talentless, and nothing more than human mannequins? Yet, despite the harshest reviews, these very actors rose to greater fame and fortune than many of those celebrated for their acting skills. Tonight, we're counting down 25 Golden Age performers who faced brutal criticism, being labeled everything from painfully dull to an outright insult to the craft of acting. But here's the surprising truth: audiences couldn't care less. In fact, the worse the critiques, the more popular these stars became. By the end of this list, your entire view of classic Hollywood may be changed forever. Prepare to see how some of your movie hero grandparents built empires on everything except traditional acting talent. The reality of Hollywood's golden era is far messier and far more entertaining than anyone ever admitted. Number 25. Pat Boone, the clean-cut singer whose acting was often described as wooden and mechanical. Boone was America's wholesome answer to Elvis Presley, but when he ventured into acting, critics were merciless. Variety once noted that Boone's performances suggested he learned his craft by watching mannequins in department store windows. His roles in films like Bernardine and April Love were panned for their robotic line delivery, with reviewers comparing his attempts at emotional scenes to teaching a refrigerator to cry. One New York Times critic famously wrote that Boone approached dramatic moments with the passion of someone reading a phone book to a sleeping audience. Co-stars reportedly had to suppress laughter during romantic scenes due to his mechanical delivery. Even in Journey to the Center of the Earth, critics joked that prehistoric monsters exhibited more emotional range than Boone, who spoke about life-threatening danger with the same enthusiasm as his breakfast cereal. Despite being dubbed the human sleeping pill, Boone's wholesome image resonated with teenage audiences, leading to significant box office success. Studios adapted by minimizing his dialogue and maximizing his singing, revealing a stark contrast between critical opinion and popular appeal. Number 24. My Van Doran. My Van Doran was Hollywood's attempt to replicate the allure of Marilyn Monroe, boasting similar curves but lacking Monroe's acclaimed talent. Critics were merciless, likening her acting to simply standing still and breathing heavily, with the Los Angeles Times quipping that her delivery resembled ordering coffee mechanically, devoid of any real understanding or emotion. Reviews harshly noted that her dramatic range fluctuated only between vacant and slightly less vacant, highlighting a glaring absence of depth. The Hollywood Reporter summed up the consensus bluntly: while the camera adored her beauty, audiences would eventually notice the emptiness behind it. She seemed to perform more for the photographers than for the camera, striking poses rather than inhabiting roles. In Teacher's Pet, her on-screen presence starkly contrasted with Clark Gable's seasoned professionalism, prompting one critic to compare watching Van Doren act alongside Gable to witnessing a community theater student share the stage with Laurence Olivier. Despite withering critiques, Van Doren's B-movies became massive hits at drive-in theaters where spectacle trumped Shakespearean acting. She intuitively understood her audience, primarily teenage boys more interested in visual appeal than nuance. Embracing the criticism, she once famously declared, "They don't pay me to act. They pay me to show up and look good." This candid acknowledgement perhaps explains why, despite critical disdain, she found her own success in Hollywood's golden era. Number 23. Lex Barker, the Tarzan critics claimed was more mannequin than man. When Lex Barker stepped into the iconic role of Tarzan, following in Johnny Weissmuller's formidable footsteps, critics did not hold back in their assessments. Reviews quickly branded Barker's performance as wooden and unconvincing, with the New York Herald Tribune commenting that he recited his lines as if from a teleprompter and wore facial expressions resembling a case of paralysis. His romantic encounters on screen, particularly in movies like Tarzan's Magic Fountain and Tarzan and the Slave Girl, were met with derision. One critic quipped that Barker seemed to display more chemistry with jungle vines than with his leading ladies. The Chicago Tribune echoed this sentiment, noting that Barker's stiffness made the surrounding trees appear livelier. Variety delivered the harshest blow, describing his Tarzan as less the jungle's king and more a forest mannequin, delivering lines as though assembling furniture. Despite an impressive physique, critics remarked on his discomfort with the physical demands of the role, contrasting him unfavorably with Weissmuller, who seemed at home swinging from vines. Barker approached each jungle scene like a man preferring a corporate boardroom to the wild. Yet, in a twist of fate, Barker's Tarzan films resonated overseas, particularly in Europe, where audiences embraced his refined portrayal. This international success highlighted how different markets held distinct expectations for their heroes. Barker himself confessed in interviews his unease with the role and expressed relief when the series concluded. His candor about his own shortcomings earned sympathy, but did little to change critical opinion. Ultimately, Barker's tenure as Tarzan underscores how audience tastes can diverge sharply from critical judgment, carving out a niche despite the harshest reviews. Number 22. Deborah Padet. The beauty often viewed as more decorative than dynamic. Deborah Padet was one of the most photographed actresses of her time, yet critics persistently questioned whether her striking looks translated into compelling performances. The Hollywood Reporter remarked that Padet appeared more comfortable posing for photographs than truly acting, as if she were perpetually waiting for the camera's click. In films like Love Me Tender and The Ten Commandments, reviewers frequently described her screen presence as ethereal yet emotionally distant. Her performances were often labeled lovely but lifeless, with some critics suggesting she belonged more to the modeling world than to acting. In Broken Arrow, her role alongside James Stewart was criticized heavily, with some saying she felt more like a beautiful prop than a genuine romantic interest. One reviewer commented that Padet delivered her lines as if reciting poetry in a language she didn't understand, technically accurate, but emotionally hollow. The most persistent critique was that Padet never appeared fully present in her scenes, often described as having a dreamy detachment that made it difficult for audiences to connect with her characters. Watching her act, a critic noted, felt like having a conversation with someone constantly gazing into a mirror. Despite these harsh assessments, many moviegoers, particularly male fans, found her mysterious and distant allure captivating. What critics saw as limitations, admirers perceived as exotic charm and sophisticated reserve. Her ethereal beauty perfectly complemented the rich Technicolor spectacles she frequently graced. Padet herself later expressed feeling confined by Hollywood's expectations, saying she often felt more like a beautiful object than a performer. Her self-awareness about her situation added a tragic and fascinating layer to her career. Number 21. John Derek. John Derek was widely recognized for his striking good looks, yet critics often disparaged him for relying heavily on his appearance rather than cultivating genuine acting skills. Reviews commonly remarked that Derek performed with the expressiveness of a statue, using his facial features more as a sculpted display than as tools to inhabit a character. His line delivery was frequently described as wooden, and his screen presence static, leading many to suggest he was better suited to modeling than acting. In films like All the King's Men, Derek was overshadowed by his more seasoned co-stars. One critic noted that while others embodied their roles, Derek simply stood there looking handsome, without truly performing. His supposed breakout role, Knock on Any Door, was met with particularly harsh criticism. The New York Times observed that Derek's performance consisted mainly of arranging his face into what he likely believed were meaningful expressions, while delivering his lines as if unfamiliar with them. Reviewers also pointed out his discomfort during dialogue-heavy scenes, with one noting that Derek seemed to be silently counting beats between his lines, as though following a personal metronome. Despite these critiques, Derek maintained his career by keenly understanding his own appeal. He carefully selected roles that best showcased his visual assets and collaborated with directors who knew how to frame him effectively on screen. Later in life, Derek transitioned into directing, demonstrating a thoughtful grasp of cinematic craft, even as his acting abilities remained questioned. His high-profile marriages to actresses such as Ursula Andress and Bo Derek kept him in the public eye well after his on-camera career declined. Ultimately, John Derek's story serves as a cautionary tale about the limitations of relying solely on physical attractiveness in the acting world. Number 20. Van Johnson. Van Johnson was known as MGM's quintessential boy next door, yet critics often dismissed his performances as too lightweight for more serious dramatic roles. Reviews from the era highlighted his infectious enthusiasm but lamented the lack of emotional depth and masculine authority in his acting. Variety remarked that Johnson brought charm to parts that might have benefited from greater gravitas. His youthful, freckled appearance was seen as a barrier when tackling adult themes, with some critics feeling he struggled to convince audiences that he was mature enough to face the challenges his characters encountered. For instance, in Command Decision, where Johnson portrayed a military officer, critics were particularly harsh. The Hollywood Reporter commented that although he tried to embody military authority, he came across more like a college student whimsically dressed in his father's uniform. One reviewer noted that Johnson, even at 35, performed with the same boyish energy he had a decade earlier, as if trapped perpetually in adolescence. This immaturity worked for lighter roles, but significantly limited his range in more dramatic fare. However, audiences, especially women, found Johnson's approachable everyman quality endearing and relatable. Where critics saw a limitation, fans embraced his genuine likability and trustworthy persona. His freckled features came to symbolize wholesome American masculinity, enabling him to connect deeply with moviegoers despite critical reservations. Number 19. Fernando Lamas, the Latin lover often dismissed as a caricature rather than a character. Fernando Lamas frequently faced criticism for his stereotypical portrayals of Latin lovers, marked by exaggerated charm and accents. Critics argued that he seemed more invested in showcasing his charisma than in developing fully realized characters, resulting in performances that felt calculated instead of natural. The critical establishment often dismissed him as all style and swagger, lacking the emotional depth expected from romantic leads. In films like The Merry Widow, reviewers noted that Lamas appeared to perform more for himself than for his co-stars. One critic remarked that he acted as though constantly checking his reflection in shop windows. His pronounced accent was often cited as a barrier to more varied roles, with some suggesting he even amplified it for effect. The New York Times observed that Lamas laid on his Latin charm with the subtlety of someone painting a barn. When faced with scenes requiring emotional vulnerability, critics found Lamas particularly unconvincing. One reviewer commented that when scripts called for sensitivity, Lamas responded by lowering his voice and flashing his teeth more deliberately, hardly the stuff of great acting. Nonetheless, Lamas had a keen understanding of his audience's desires and delivered precisely what they sought: exotic romance and continental sophistication. His self-aware approach to his screen persona endeared him to viewers who appreciated his tongue-in-cheek style. Lamas once famously said, "I don't act, I react," an admission critics interpreted as acknowledging his limitations, but which audiences found refreshingly honest. His legacy continued through his son Lorenzo, who achieved similar success, proving that recognizing and embracing one's appeal can be more valuable than endlessly expanding acting range. Number 18. Alan Ladd, the anti-hero critics deemed emotionally distant. Alan Ladd was often criticized for his cold and detached screen presence, with a delivery so monotone it left many reviewers unimpressed. While he excelled in action-packed scenes, critics noted his performances frequently lacked warmth, making him an unlikely candidate for romantic leads. For instance, in The Great Gatsby, his portrayal was described as having the romantic passion of a banker discussing interest rates, flat and uninspiring. His relatively short stature was also seen by some as a limitation for leading man roles. However, ironically, this aspect added a unique dimension to his tough guy parts. Critics pointed out that his compact frame made his roles as an action hero surprisingly compelling, adding an unexpected twist to the usual lumbering protagonist. In Shane, considered his finest role, opinions were divided. Some appreciated his understated approach, while others found it underwhelming. Reviewers remarked that his mysterious aura could either signify character depth or simply a lack of expression. Despite ongoing criticism, Ladd's cool, enigmatic demeanor found the perfect fit within film noir and Western genres, where audiences embraced his anti-hero characters that reflected the post-war sense of disillusionment. Unfortunately, the persistent negative reviews weighed heavily on him, reportedly leading to bouts of depression and a tragic struggle to accept that what critics saw as shortcomings were exactly what captivated his fans. His career serves as one of Hollywood's saddest tales, marked by a performer who never fully appreciated the very qualities that endear him to audiences. Number 17. Steve Reeves. Steve Reeves transformed the sword and sandal genre with his impressive physique, yet critics were often dismissive of his acting abilities. The New York Times remarked that Reeves appeared far more comfortable lifting weights than delivering lines from a script. Reviews consistently pointed out his wooden delivery, suggesting that his casting was largely based on his remarkable physical appearance rather than dramatic talent. In his iconic role as Hercules, critics observed that Reeves spoke about mythological adventures with the same enthusiasm as someone discussing his workout routine. His performances were frequently described as statuesque, a critique rather than a compliment. One reviewer explained that Reeves seemed to pose while others carried the dialogue, calling him less Hercules and more a muscular piece of furniture. Critics also noted his apparent discomfort with dialogue-heavy scenes. Variety highlighted that Reeves appeared godlike during action sequences, but seemed desperately eager to exit during dramatic moments. Despite the harsh reviews, international audiences, especially in Europe, embraced Reeves' films enthusiastically. His credibility as a physically imposing hero satisfied viewers looking for thrilling entertainment over subtle character development. Reeves himself admitted he never considered himself an actor, regarding his film career as an extension of his bodybuilding success. His candid acknowledgement of his limitations made him endearing to fans who appreciated his unpretentious approach to cinema. Number 16. Rhonda Fleming. Rhonda Fleming was aptly nicknamed the Technicolor Queen, a tribute to her striking red hair and stunning beauty that lit up the screen. However, critics often lamented that her appeal was largely superficial, focusing more on her visual presence than any substantial acting skill. The Hollywood Reporter pointed out that while she photographed beautifully, Fleming struggled to infuse her characters with depth. Reviews repeatedly described her performances as lovely yet shallow, suggesting she was better suited for modeling than for serious acting roles. In films like Spellbound, critics noted that she was overshadowed by her accomplished co-stars, such as Ingrid Bergman and Gregory Peck. One reviewer sharply observed that Fleming merely stands around looking gorgeous, leaving the heavy dramatic work to the true actors. Her emotional range was a frequent target of criticism. Reviewers reported that she seemed to carry the same pleasant but vacant expression across all her roles. One critic wryly noted that her emotional spectrum extended merely from mild pleasure to slight concern, with an occasional dip into moderate happiness. Yet, Fleming's understanding of her Hollywood role was clear. In adventure films like Gunfight at the OK Corral, critics admitted that the genre didn't demand much beyond her looking beautiful in period attire. As the New York Times put it, Fleming reminded audiences that even the frontier had its share of beautiful women. She embraced her position as a visual component of Technicolor spectacles, delivering exactly what the filmmakers and audiences desired. Fleming herself later spoke candidly about her career, acknowledging that casting decisions often prioritized her looks over her talent. This self-awareness made her more relatable and sympathetic than stars who were oblivious to their own limitations. Ultimately, Rhonda Fleming's legacy is one of a captivating visual icon whose breathtaking presence perfectly complemented the vibrant, colorful films of Hollywood's golden era. Number 15. Robert Taylor, the flawless profile with a hollow core. Dubbed MGM's quintessential leading man thanks to his impeccable looks, Taylor faced ongoing criticism about whether his physical beauty translated into genuine acting prowess. Variety remarked that his performances were as polished and emotionally distant as his appearance. Reviewers frequently pointed out his wooden delivery, suggesting that he was more a product of studio image crafting than authentic talent. In the classic Camille, where he starred opposite Greta Garbo, critics were particularly harsh, highlighting the stark contrast between Garbo's passionate portrayal and Taylor's mechanical line readings. One reviewer described Taylor as standing beside Garbo like a lifeless statue placed next to a vibrant, breathing woman. Throughout his career, Taylor's dramatic skills were consistently questioned, with many observing that he seemed more focused on maintaining his appearance than immersing himself in his characters. The New York Times noted that he approached each scene as if posing for a magazine cover, rather than crafting believable personas. However, Taylor found more acceptance in action and Western genres, which demanded less emotional range. According to one critic, Taylor fit well in Westerns because cowboys are supposed to be strong and silent, though in his case, critics argued he was more vacant than strong. Despite such harsh critiques, his enduring appeal was evident as audiences valued his reliability and classic good looks. Fans saw consistency and understated elegance where critics saw emptiness. Taylor reportedly struggled with the persistent criticism, feeling that his striking appearance was both his greatest asset and his biggest limitation. In his later years, he sought more challenging roles, but critics remained unimpressed, underscoring the divide between his on-screen allure and perceived artistic depth. Number 14. George Raft, the gangster star often playing himself. Raft was frequently criticized for his limited acting range and for repeatedly portraying similar tough guy roles. Critics observed that he seemed to merely be George Raft in different costumes rather than crafting distinct characters. His real-life connections to organized crime lent an authenticity to his performances, but also constrained his versatility. Many reviewers dismissed him as one-dimensional, suggesting his success stemmed more from typecasting than genuine acting talent. One critic remarked, "Raft doesn't act tough, he just is tough," highlighting the difference between acting and simply embodying an image. In Scarface, critics acknowledged his effectiveness, but questioned whether it reflected true acting or simply being himself. The Hollywood Reporter noted that Raft's performance worked because he was essentially portraying what he knew, but this wasn't necessarily acting. His delivery was stiff and his characterizations repetitive. Watching a George Raft film was likened to seeing the same performance with different supporting casts and settings. However, audiences connected with Raft's authentic tough guy persona and appreciated his ability to bring credibility to gangster roles, something trained actors often failed to emulate. His real-life background added a layer of realism that resonated deeply with viewers, securing his lasting popularity despite critical skepticism. Number 13. Zsa Gabor, the socialite whom critics claimed merely played herself professionally. Zsa Gabor was often dismissed by critics as more personality than actress, known more for turning her glamorous social life into a performance than for embodying diverse characters. Reviews frequently noted that she seemed to be playing variations of her own persona rather than crafting distinct roles. The critical consensus questioned whether Gabor was truly acting or simply showcasing her lavish lifestyle on screen. In films like Moulin Rouge, critics observed that she appeared more focused on displaying her exquisite jewelry than on developing her character's depth. One critic remarked, "Gabor doesn't inhabit roles, she decorates them." Her pronounced accent and theatrical flair were often viewed as hindrances rather than assets. The New York Times suggested that Gabor's acting resembled someone who mastered her craft by watching herself at glamorous parties. Critics heavily criticized her limited emotional range, with one reviewer noting she had exactly two expressions, glamorous and slightly less glamorous, a limitation that severely restricted the types of stories she could tell. Yet, Gabor was astutely aware of her appeal and capitalized on it brilliantly. While critics saw lack of versatility, audiences found her authenticity entertaining and appreciated her old-world glamour. Number 12. Jeff Chandler. The stoic hero, often labeled as impressively rigid. Jeff Chandler was known for his commanding physical presence, yet critics frequently highlighted his limited range as an actor. Reviews cited his stiff delivery and suggested that he excelled more in action roles than in emotionally complex character studies. In his Oscar-nominated performance in Broken Arrow, critics acknowledged his sincerity, but remained unconvinced about his versatility. One critic noted, "Chandler means well, but meaning well isn't the same as acting well." Romantic scenes were especially challenging for him, with Variety observing that he approached love scenes like a man discussing business contracts, technically proficient, but emotionally distant. Despite relying heavily on his deep voice and imposing stature, critics felt Chandler often lacked heart and imagination in his roles. However, audiences responded well to his straightforward and no-nonsense portrayals of heroic characters, especially in westerns and action films. Although Chandler's untimely death cut short any potential growth, his reputation remains that of a competent and reliable leading man rather than a truly gifted actor. Number 11. Rory Calhoun. The Western star who looked great on horseback but struggled with his lines. Rory Calhoun was often critiqued for his limited acting range, with reviewers pointing out that he seemed far more at home in action sequences than in delivering dialogue. Critics described his performances as serviceable yet unremarkable, suggesting that his rugged cowboy appearance carried more weight than any real acting talent. In films like The Silver Whip, critics noted that his line delivery felt as if he was reading from a script for the very first time. One reviewer commented that Calhoun seemed better acquainted with horses than with human conversation. When scenes required emotional depth or vulnerability, the New York Times observed that Calhoun appeared confused, as if the director were speaking an unfamiliar language. Repeatedly, his dramatic skills came under scrutiny, with many suggesting he would have been better suited to silent films, where his rough-and-tumble look could speak louder than his words. One critic summed it up by saying Calhoun worked best when he wasn't required to speak. Despite these critiques, Rory Calhoun carved out a successful career in westerns and action films. His authentic cowboy persona, bolstered by his real-life rodeo experience, resonated with audiences seeking straightforward entertainment. His rugged credibility on screen made him a favorite among fans who valued his physical presence over polish in acting. Number 10. Audie Murphy. The war hero critics said lived his best role before acting. Known as America's most decorated World War II soldier, Murphy often faced criticism for his wooden acting despite his real-life heroism. Reviewers acknowledged his authenticity in combat scenes but found his dramatic moments stiff and unconvincing. The critical consensus was that Murphy's fame stemmed more from his military record than from his abilities as an actor. In films where he portrayed himself, critics found it ironic that he seemed uneasy reenacting his own heroic actions, noting he appeared more natural in actual war footage than in dramatizations. His performances were described as sincere yet limited, heroic but hollow, with particular discomfort observed in romantic or civilian roles. Critics often remarked that while Murphy could convincingly portray a war hero because he truly was one, he struggled to embody other roles like lover or father. Moreover, his apparent lack of enthusiasm for the Hollywood lifestyle and minimal interest in honing his craft made it difficult for audiences to connect with his characters fully. Despite critical reservations, audiences admired Murphy's genuine modesty and authentic military bearing. Where reviewers saw limitations, fans recognized real American heroism and unpretentious masculinity. His story symbolized the American dream and served as a poignant reminder of recent sacrifices, cementing his place in cinematic history beyond traditional acting prowess. Number 9. Troy Donahue. Troy Donahue was often dismissed by critics as beautiful but empty, a teenage heartthrob whose on-screen presence seemed vacant despite his widespread popularity. Reviewers characterized his performances as dreamy yet lacking substance, suggesting that his casting was based more on looks than genuine acting talent. In films like A Summer Place, critics remarked that he appeared genuinely perplexed by the emotional demands of his roles. One review famously described Donahue's line delivery as if he had just woken up and wasn't quite sure where he was. Throughout his career, Donahue's dramatic range was routinely questioned, with critics noting that he seemed to wear the same pleasant but mildly bewildered expression regardless of the scene or emotion. His attempts at love scenes drew particular scorn, as he appeared more uncomfortable than convincingly romantic. Watching him try to evoke passion, one observer commented, was akin to witnessing someone struggling with a complex math problem while pretending to be in love. Nevertheless, teenage audiences, especially young girls, found Donahue's sensitive and vulnerable looks irresistible. Where critics saw hollowness, fans saw romantic possibility and an approachable masculinity that wasn't intimidating. His appeal lay in his accessible charm, which resonated profoundly with the youth of his era, securing him a lasting place among the most adored teen idols of Hollywood's golden age. Number 8. Tab Hunter. The All-American star frequently criticized for his imperfect acting but admired for his flawless looks. Tab Hunter was often noted by critics for his stiff and wooden performances, with many suggesting his popularity stemmed more from his charming, wholesome appearance than from genuine acting talent. Reviews commonly described him as pleasant yet limited, questioning whether his bland niceness could translate into truly compelling screen presence. In films like Battle Cry, critics remarked that he was overshadowed by more seasoned co-stars. One reviewer pointed out, Hunter stands around looking wholesome, while the actual actors create fully realized characters. His range was regularly scrutinized, with observers noting he tended to wear the same mild expression, whether portraying happiness, sadness, or facing mortal danger. Critics also highlighted his discomfort in dialogue-heavy scenes. The Hollywood Reporter said he delivered lines as if memorized phonetically, without truly understanding their meaning. Nonetheless, Tab Hunter's wholesome image and boy-next-door appeal resonated powerfully with teenage audiences. While critics perceived blandness, fans saw a trustworthy masculinity and romantic potential that felt unthreatening. Hunter's later revelation about his closeted sexuality added a poignant layer to his career, as critics had often chastised him for lacking the very authenticity that studio pressures prevented him from expressing. Number 7. John Agar. The connected star critics said, married up in acting ability. John Agar often found himself the target of harsh criticism throughout his acting career, with reviewers pointing out his wooden and unconvincing performances. Many believed that his early success owed more to his marriage to Shirley Temple than to any innate acting talent. Critics described his acting as amateurish, suggesting that leading roles were beyond his grasp and that he was better suited to supporting parts. In films like Fort Apache, Agar's portrayal felt awkward next to seasoned actors such as John Wayne. One critic remarked that Agar seemed like a child playing dress-up in his father's uniform when trying to convey authority. His line delivery was frequently stiff, and he appeared uncomfortable in emotionally demanding scenes. The New York Times once observed that he acted as though surprised to find himself in movies, uncertain of his purpose on screen. Criticism was especially severe for his roles in science fiction films, where his wooden delivery made even outlandish plots seem all the more ridiculous. In Tarantula, a reviewer noted that Agar delivered his warnings about giant spiders with less conviction than someone ordering coffee. Despite these judgments, Agar found a niche in B-movies and sci-fi genres, where his earnest everyman quality resonated. Audiences appreciated his unpretentious, sincere approach to heroic roles in genre films where authenticity mattered less than simplicity. Ultimately, John Agar's career became a study in how an actor with clear limitations could still find connection with audiences by embracing roles that suited his strengths, even if critics remained unimpressed. Number 6. Victor Mature. The muscle-bound leading man critics often mocked for relying too heavily on his physique over his acting chops. Victor Mature was a towering figure in Hollywood epics, known more for his striking presence than his dramatic depth. Critics frequently commented that he tended to pose rather than perform, with his acting playing second fiddle to his physicality. Many reviews labeled him as all brawn and little artistry, especially in biblical epics, where the spectacle was prioritized over subtlety. In films like Samson and Delilah, reviewers noted that Mature delivered his lines with the enthusiasm one might reserve for discussing his workout routine rather than engaging in heartfelt drama. His love scenes, according to critics, felt more like pauses between opportunities to showcase his impressive torso than genuine romantic moments. Variety even observed that while his action sequences radiated strength, his dramatic scenes revealed a longing for the exit. Despite these critiques, audiences embraced Mature's commanding screen presence and rugged masculinity, particularly in grand spectacle films. Fans saw in him the embodiment of strength and heroic appeal that perfectly suited the epic genre's demands. Mature himself was refreshingly candid about his limitations, once jesting, "I'm no actor, and I've got 64 films to prove it." His acknowledgement of his weaknesses made him more relatable to fans who admired his straightforward, unapologetic contribution to Hollywood's visual grandeur. His career flourished because he recognized his role, not as a dramatic actor, but as a striking visual icon. Victor Mature's journey showcases how embracing one's strengths and limitations can carve out a lasting legacy in cinema history, even when critics are unimpressed. Number 5. John Wayne. The American icon critics said was just himself in different hats. Throughout his career, Wayne faced relentless criticism for his limited acting range and the tendency to portray essentially the same persona across various settings. Critics often remarked that Wayne didn't act so much as simply show up as John Wayne. They argued that his success stemmed more from his iconic image than any genuine acting ability. In films like The Quiet Man, while the movie's charm was acknowledged, critics noted Wayne appeared uneasy with the romantic comedy elements. As one reviewer put it, Wayne tried to be charming, but charm requires a lightness that he simply lacked. His performances were commonly described as one-dimensional and inflexible, with many pointing out that whether he was playing a cowboy, a soldier, or even a Roman centurion, he approached every role with the same drawl and swagger. Although later critics would appreciate the complexity of films like The Searchers, contemporary reviews found Wayne's performance limiting. His portrayal of Ethan Edwards was described as merely John Wayne expressing anger rather than embodying a character's stoicism. Yet, Wayne himself understood his audience's expectations. They came to see John Wayne, not intricate character studies. While critics saw his acting as limited, fans embraced his dependable masculinity and authentic American values. His consistency, rather than range, became his greatest strength. Number 4. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was one of Hollywood's leading men, but critics often dismissed his acting as wooden and lacking genuine emotion. Despite his popularity, his performances were frequently described as mechanical, with many believing his success was more about his striking looks than any true talent. In his early roles, reviewers claimed that Hudson acted like someone who had been handed meticulous directions on how to appear star-like, yet had forgotten how to be human. His romantic scenes, in particular, received harsh criticism for their lack of warmth and authenticity. Reviewers noted that Hudson seemed more at ease in adventure films than in romantic dramas, with his notion of passion being limited to speaking slightly louder and opening his eyes wider. Critics also pointed out his apparent inability to convey real emotion in dramatic moments, often delivering his lines as if reading directly from a teleprompter. However, despite these critiques, Hudson's reliable charm and classic good looks made him a favorite leading man, especially in films targeted toward female audiences. Where critics saw artificiality, fans found dependable charisma and a non-threatening masculinity that resonated strongly. His enduring appeal demonstrated that, even without acclaimed acting skills, A star could shine brightly by connecting with their audience in ways beyond technique. Number 3. Charlton H. was often criticized for his overly theatrical style, which many found ill-suited for film. Reviewers argued that his performances were bombastic and lacked subtlety, suggesting he acted more for the back row of a theater than for the intimacy of the camera. Critics frequently described him as hammy and overblown, feeling that his grand gestures and booming delivery didn't translate well to the screen's closer scrutiny. His biographical epics, while grand in scale, sometimes came across as excessive in his hands. For instance, in Touch of Evil, he was noted to be completely overshadowed by Orson Welles' more nuanced direction and acting. Some critics said that Charlton H's style equated shouting with passion and broad gestures with genuine emotion. One review observed that his scenes felt like a Gettysburg Address delivered to a vast crowd, even during moments meant to be intimate conversations. When cast in contemporary roles, reviewers often felt his theatrical approach left him appearing misplaced, as if lost at a costume party. On the other hand, Charlton Heston's commanding presence and resonant voice perfectly suited the epic films that brought him fame. While critics saw his performance as overacting, audiences appreciated the authority and gravitas he brought to larger-than-life characters. His style, although divisive, underscored the theatrical grandeur that defined many classic Hollywood epics. Number 2. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling star, was often criticized for relying heavily on his natural charm rather than honing genuine acting skills. Critics pointed out that he seemed to simply play himself adorned in various costumes, with his performances leaning more towards personality than true acting craft. The critical consensus suggested that Flynn's success rested more on his roguish charisma than any dramatic ability. In films like The Adventures of Robin Hood, while the movie itself was celebrated for its entertainment value, reviewers noted that Flynn seemed to be having far more fun than his character realistically should. One critic remarked that Flynn approached serious scenes as though he had just heard a good joke and was trying not to laugh, frequently disrupting the suspension of disbelief with his evident enjoyment. Variety observed that Flynn acted like someone amazed to be paid to dress up and play. His attempts at serious dramatic roles were met with particular harshness, with critics arguing he was far better suited to adventure films where his acting limitations were less noticeable. The New York Times likened watching Flynn in dramatic roles to seeing someone trying to be serious while wearing a party hat. Nonetheless, Flynn's infectious enthusiasm and effortless screen presence made him a perfect fit for swashbuckling adventures. While critics saw shortcomings, audiences embraced the genuine fun and romantic excitement he conveyed, making viewers feel as if they too were part of the daring escapades. Number 1. Tyrone Power. Tyrone Power was often the subject of sharp criticism, with reviewers accusing him of focusing more on his looks than on honing genuine acting skills. Critics frequently said he appeared more concerned with maintaining his handsome appearance than delivering believable performances. His work was described as beautiful, but lacking substance. Many considered him the quintessential movie star who never quite mastered the craft of acting, attributing his success entirely to his extraordinary charm and good looks. In serious roles like The Razor's Edge, Power faced merciless reviews. One critic remarked that while he attempted to convey spiritual depth, he instead achieved an aura of emptiness, as if a magnificent cathedral stood empty and silent. Such critiques were a constant throughout his career, pointing out that he seemed preoccupied with his appearance rather than embodying the emotions his roles demanded. The New York Times described his acting as if he were perpetually aware of checking his reflection in the camera lens. Despite the harsh judgments from critics, Power's stunning beauty and undeniable romantic appeal made him one of Hollywood's most beloved stars. Where critics saw vanity and superficiality, audiences saw the perfect leading man who embodied their fantasies of romance and allure. His striking visage launched countless dreams and sold millions of tickets, proving that in the golden age of Hollywood, cinematic success often revolved around more than just acting talent. These 25 actors demonstrated that triumph in the entertainment world often transcends conventional acting talent. Their journeys reveal that charisma, timing, a keen understanding of their audience, and relentless perseverance frequently outweigh technical skill. Whether one agrees with the critics who dismissed them or the fans who celebrated them, these stars left an indelible imprint on cinematic history. They serve as a reminder that films are ultimately about entertainment, and sometimes the most captivating performers are those who embrace their limitations rather than conceal them. Which of these stars do you secretly admire? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this exploration of Hollywood's golden age intriguing, please like and subscribe for more captivating insights into the legends who shaped cinema history.